Imagine believing your life is a stable, loving partnership, only for a single message to reveal a decade-long web of betrayal involving your wife and her own cousin. Hello, and welcome to another incredibly intense real-life account. I'm a 26-year-old man, and I always thought my wife, 25, was loyal to me. Recently, I discovered she had been involved with her cousin. This happened a couple of weeks ago, and my feelings shifted from complete trust to profound doubt. My wife and I met when I was 19, falling in love quickly. She had a 4-month-old child from a previous relationship. The biological father was never present during our time together. Since childhood, I had longed to be a parent, but a genetic condition I possess made me wary of having biological children, so adoption always resonated with me. We lived as a typical family, eventually marrying last year. She wasn't particularly close to her extended family, but she did have 2 cousins she maintained a connection with. I enjoyed getting to know them, finding them to be approachable people. She once mentioned that one cousin, Max, had tried to kiss her when they were young teenagers, around 12 or 13, but she had fled. I asked if she ever shared this with anyone, and she dismissed it as a foolish childhood incident. We saw Max every Christmas, and he seemed like a regular guy. I actually liked him, especially compared to her more formal relatives. Recently, they reconnected, attending several family gatherings. We only had one vehicle, and since I needed it for work, he often drove her. Nothing seemed amiss. They were family, after all. My wife's behavior showed no obvious changes. However, one evening while I was watching television, she approached me, asking about a female coworker I had recently befriended online. I had accepted the request. We generally had an open relationship, rarely getting offended by such things. For instance, she might comment on an attractive man, and I thought nothing of mentioning this new colleague. She didn't directly accuse me of infidelity, but her tone suggested it, which was unprecedented. I recalled reading that those who cheat sometimes project their guilt onto their partners. The family outings were legitimate. Photos were posted online, and my wife sent me pictures from them. There were 2 such events, and each time she returned home seeming distant, almost robotic. Our intimate life seemed normal, perhaps quieter, but she suffered from depression and sometimes withdrew. When I inquired about her well-being, she attributed her mood to that. Then, 2 weeks ago, she left for work. It was my day off, so I pottered around the house, dropped our son at school, and returned to check my email. On Facebook, I noticed a new message. It was from her cousin. We had recently discussed attending a minor league baseball game, so I assumed he was replying to that. The message read, "I'd like to see you on your knees." I was utterly bewildered until I realized my wife was still logged in, and the message was intended for her. A surge of pure rage consumed me. I immediately scrolled through their chat history. It was filled with him making advances. My wife's responses, like, "But I'm married and now I'm married," sounded like weak rejections, as if she was declining out of obligation, not genuine disinterest. I felt disgusted and completely stunned. Yet, since there was no explicit mention of anything physical happening, and she was technically saying no, albeit gently, I couldn't definitively accuse her of physical cheating. When she returned home and our son was asleep, I confronted her. She instantly dissolved into uncontrollable sobs, uttering phrases like, "I didn't do anything. I didn't know how to tell you, and I just hoped he would stop." Both she and I had endured childhood abuse from family friends, undergoing years of therapy. Because of this, we generally possess strong communication skills regarding comfort, boundaries, and how to articulate discomfort with unwanted advances. I loved her and desperately wanted to believe her, to think he was merely a persistent creep. However, her silence and seemingly normal behavior made me suspect more was occurring. I told her I believed her and asked if I should message him to tell him to back off, expressing my disgust given they were cousins. Alternatively, I asked if she preferred to handle it herself. She initially stated she would inform him that I knew and that he shouldn't contact her. But her resolve wavered. She merely hoped he would cease. I was incandescent with fury, but kept it hidden, telling her that since she wouldn't, I would give him a piece of my mind. This was my wife. If she was being harassed, I would put a stop to it. If she wasn't, she was betraying me. So I messaged him. He saw it, but offered no reply. My wife insisted I should have let her manage the situation. I countered that I wouldn't stay silent in such circumstances. She seemed to grasp my point, eventually conceding I was likely right to confront him, as she hadn't known how. Things seemed to normalize, but 3 days later, I came home to find her weeping. I asked what was wrong, and she replied, "It's Max, you should have let me handle it. I messaged him yesterday and he won't talk to me." We rehashed the discussion about me not passively watching someone harass my wife. She gave me a brief, fleeting look, but it conveyed that she didn't perceive it as harassment. We ended the conversation agreeing that I acted as any man would. 2 days later, I arrived in bed late, around 2 a.m., after finishing some work. I overheard her on the phone, softly chuckling. This was unusual. She claimed it was her mother discussing our son's birthday, which I didn't believe. At this point, I decided to feign ignorance, hoping she'd feel comfortable enough for me to observe the situation. The next day, she was crying again. After 2 weeks of this instability, I had reached my limit. When I asked if it was about Max again, she said she tried to call and apologize for not handling the situation herself, and he was still refusing to speak to her. I snapped. I told her that either he was abusing her or she was betraying me, and I was going to catch them. I wanted to trust her, but I wasn't naive. I felt a destructive force building within me, ready to shatter their lives, waiting for concrete proof. I regretted the outburst. I decided to apologize to her and suggested we talk that evening. It was Sunday, and our son usually stayed overnight with my parents every other Sunday. I felt a pang of shame, but I believed it was in my best interest to investigate. If I found nothing, we would discuss the events, their beginning, how I could support her, and our path forward. I loved her, and the notion of her being harassed by someone who should care for her broke my heart. However, if I uncovered any complicity on her part, I was instantly done with the relationship. I don't believe in couples counseling for infidelity, and with the added element of incest, I knew I could never look at her the same way. I resolved to update everyone. Update 1, I hadn't slept at all. When she woke, I made breakfast, apologized for my earlier outburst, and reiterated my desire to talk that evening. She agreed, seemingly unfazed, admitting her recent behavior had been poor. I explained that harassment from a family member was uniquely difficult. She simply concurred. I initially wasn't going to snoop, but many online encouraged it, and not wanting to disregard advice I'd sought, I decided to check her emails. Her calm demeanor that morning actually lessened my suspicion, but I proceeded anyway. The depth of disgust, loathing, and anger I felt upon reading those emails was indescribable. Divorce was inevitable. I found an email titled "Yummy," containing a picture of her cousin with bodily fluid on his face. The exchanges described his encounters with various men. They referenced past sexual encounters they shared, including a photo of a sex toy captioned, "I still have our old friend." Then I read truly vile, demeaning exchanges where she adopted a dominant role, insulting his anatomy. The dates revealed this was from a year prior. As I continued reading, it became clear they had frequently engaged in sexual activity, but ceased after our marriage. We had been together for several years before marrying. Later, she started using the "I'm married" excuse, but it seemed to be a fantasy for him, a game of forbidden touch. I was raising her child, and she had done this to me. I had sacrificed 6 years, adjusting my work schedule and foregoing better paying opportunities to be available for childcare. I went outside, sat on the porch, and called my brother. After explaining everything, I asked him to temporarily take my firearm. I've never been one for aggression, but in that moment, I felt myself teetering on the edge of irrationality. I wouldn't do anything reckless, but I feared a complete mental collapse. I needed to pack my belongings and check into a hotel. I had printed all the conversations, sent copies to myself, and planned to dig for more evidence. I bought a pack of cigarettes, something I'd quit 4 years prior. I also had to schedule an appointment at an SD clinic. According to their disgusting exchanges, part of their activity involved unprotected sex with these men. My soon-to-be ex-wife had an IUD, so I had never used protection with her. Now I faced months of agonizing waiting for test results, as I understood HIV tests took time. I had a general idea of his work schedule, as I once worked for the same company. Before settling into my hotel, I intended to drive to his wife's home armed with proof. There was no mending this, no therapy, no hope, nothing positive. I didn't even want an apology. I was divorcing her, and she would receive nothing. I despised my current existence. I wasn't depressed or sad. I hadn't cried. I just felt a fiery core of fury in my chest that only the cigarettes briefly quelled. I couldn't bear to be near either of them. I knew I wasn't violent, but I desperately wanted to physically harm them both. Update 2, I went to a lawyer first, then straight to Max's house. I spoke with his wife, who was, as expected, devastated. We discussed the incestuous nature of the affair. I also told her he was boasting to my wife about having unprotected sex with various men he met online, sending my wife pictures of himself with bodily fluids on his face. She insisted on seeing the evidence despite my advice, and she was utterly crushed. She revealed he was bisexual and had always been drawn to other men. She had reluctantly permitted him to occasionally meet men to get it out of his system, believing he hadn't done so in over a year. After this, I stayed in a hotel where I remained, talking with my parents and brother. My mother-in-law called, pleading for me to return home, insisting I must have made a mistake. I ignored her voicemails. My wife called numerous times, but I didn't answer. She sent no messages, leading me to assume she knew I was documenting everything and didn't want to provide more ammunition, a tactic I would employ in her position. At the end of the day, I called her, keeping it brief, saying we would talk tomorrow. When I finally returned home, she was a trembling, broken figure. She tried to embrace me, but I firmly told her, "It's over." She insisted she never betrayed me, that I must have misinterpreted something, and that Max's wife was spreading falsehoods due to their mutual animosity. It was then I realized she thought I'd heard about the affair from someone else. She didn't know I had uncovered it myself. I then presented the evidence, the printed emails, the yummy photos, the our-old friend sex toy picture, and her dominant, demeaning messages to him. She had even requested pictures of him after his encounters with other men. Truly sickening material. I'm no prude, I'm quite open sexually, so it wasn't a matter of me being sexually repressed. As soon as she grasped that I was the one who discovered everything and informed Max's wife, her demeanor shifted from tearful sadness to explosive anger and full-blown hysterics. "You should have talked to me first," she shrieked, threatening to ruin me. "You knew she would do this. I told him to stop texting me like that." At that final statement, I absolutely erupted. I informed her I had just read a year's worth of messages and emails, and not once did she ever tell him to stop. I called her a degenerate, declared we likely both had HIV, and she collapsed, unable to respond, just sobbing uncontrollably. I reiterated that we were divorcing. I then called her father, telling him to come to my house because she shouldn't be alone in that state. Returning to my hotel, I saw messages from Max's wife. She had done her own extensive digging, unearthing discussions of their sexual encounters from 2010 on MySpace. My wife had initially told me he attempted to kiss her at 13. In reality, they began their illicit relationship at 15 or 16 when MySpace was still widely used. Seeing how far back it went finally broke me. I'm not one for emotional displays, but I wept openly in front of his wife. She cried too. Afterward, I took her to my lawyer, and one of his partners would now handle her divorce. Throughout this, Max was panicking, crying, trying to locate his wife, still attempting to talk to me, insisting it was all a big misunderstanding. It turned out Max and his wife lived in a house owned by his parents, who came down hard on their son, forbidding him from staying there and apologizing to their daughter-in-law, offering her and her child refuge in the house indefinitely. He was essentially disowned. Max's father even mistakenly believed Max had abused my wife as a child, explaining her current behavior. She was his favorite niece, almost a second daughter, so Max was now on the run, as his father wanted him gone. My own father, without prompting, offered to cover my hotel expenses for the week. Today, I told my boss precisely what occurred and that I needed 2 weeks to reorganize my life. He shared his own difficult divorce experience and told me to take all the time I needed, offering to tell everyone I had a sick parent, which was kind of him. Now, lying in my hotel room, I missed my stepson, who I might never see again. I had raised him for 6 years, changed his diapers, bottle-fed him at 3 a.m., taken time off work when he was ill, and nursed him after he broke his arm so his mother could rest for work. The rest of the world could crumble to mud, and I wouldn't flinch, but the thought of never seeing him again tore at me unlike anything else. I needed therapy. It would take immense effort to process this. I wasn't suicidal. As an atheist, this was my only life. Ending it meant that was it. I would speak with my lawyer later and meet Max's wife again, as there was apparently more I didn't know. I had a doctor's appointment tomorrow, followed by 6 agonizing months of waiting for results. Thank you for the support. I promise further updates if more developed. Update 3. This update is lengthy as I'm processing many thoughts. In short, I will get weekend custody. My marriage was a sham, a cover for an incestuous affair. My HIV test was negative. My ex-wife and I are working towards a quick divorce, dividing minimal assets and bills. I'm developing feelings for Sherry, Max's wife, the other survivor, but I'm trying not to act on them, aware of the complexities. Thank you for the support. I'm sharing this update to sort through my thoughts publicly, allowing strangers to offer perspective. I do listen and consider all advice. A few weeks ago, I found explicit texts on my wife's social media from her cousin. She claimed it was recent and unwanted. I messaged him demanding he cease contact, believing it was harassment. It wasn't. They had been sexually involved since their early teens. Divorce was happening. Much has transpired since my last update. First, the good news. My rapid HIV test came back negative, with results in the same visit. I'll retest in a few months, but will live cautiously. Sherry, Max's wife, accompanied me for support. Her appointment was in 2 days. I had my first extended conversation with my soon-to-be ex-wife. We had an explosive initial discussion earlier in the week and conversed sparingly since. I've been calling her nightly to say goodnight to our son, who believes I'm just working a lot. I plan to tell him a version of the truth suitable for a 6-year-old soon. Reconciliation was never an option, and she accepted this, for which I was grateful. Her reasons for the affair didn't concern me, offering no benefit, but for my own emotional clarity, I asked her to be truthful about the duration and cause, or if I had contributed to her actions. She appeared to have been crying but was calm and candid, suggesting relief in finally discussing it, however twisted that sounded. Essentially, she was the instigator, deeply in love with him. They weren't together because I was, as I now realized, a sham wife figure, providing a facade of normalcy. This was crushing. She insisted she loved me, but I no longer believed it, nor did it matter. My 6 years were a lie, a cover for their deception. I questioned if I even understood genuine romantic love. She seemed hurt by my pain, but I couldn't discern its authenticity, and it was irrelevant. Our primary discussion concerned my stepson and our future arrangements. Before I could speak, she offered weekend custody, agreeing to sign it in the divorce. I believe she felt deep remorse for how this affected him, repeatedly emphasizing that I was his father, his only dad, and removing me would be profoundly damaging. We planned to tell him the difficult news in a few days. I was taking him to the zoo soon and wanted to tell him afterward, but he loved the zoo, and I didn't want him to associate it with our divorce. It tore me apart, figuring out how to minimize the trauma for him. I considered making it positive, promising a new room in my new apartment that he could paint and furnish, making us feel like a team. We weren't wealthy, so we agreed to keep our separate accounts, fairly divide remaining utility bills, and proceed with the divorce. We planned to meet at the courthouse for me to file, serving her immediately. I wanted it over quickly. I was impressed that she seemed willing to make amends by granting me the one thing I truly wanted, continuing to be a father, refusing child support. You didn't make him, and you didn't do this to him, I thought. Despite my current hatred for her, her desire to make amends was notable. Maybe she just wanted free weekends for her cousin. But as long as I remained a dad, I was willing to accept it. In other news, I visited Sherry to check on her. Max's parents were there, surprised to see me. Max's aunt hugged me, crying and apologizing profusely, almost bringing me to tears. She believed I would never see my son again, which deeply upset her because she cherished watching me play with him at family gatherings. Max's parents confirmed Sherry and her daughter could stay in their second home indefinitely. Max was forbidden and essentially disowned. The family mistakenly believed Max had abused my wife as a child, viewing it as a form of Stockholm Syndrome. Call me cynical, but for my son's stability, I wouldn't correct them. If this belief allowed my wife to stay with her parents without family conflict in front of my boy, I would let it stand. Sherry was, understandably, distraught, oscillating between composure tears, and anger. Distracting her with unrelated topics helped calm her. Her family was funding therapy, her brother was visiting for a week, and her mother was moving in for a month to support her. I fed her daughter, a sweet child whose presence briefly eased my anxiety. Last night, I invited Sherry to the movies with friends. I was glad she came, but I realized I either needed to distance myself from her or discuss my growing feelings. Nothing explicit had been said, but she was casually touching me, something new. When I mentioned a tension headache and a knot in my neck, she spontaneously massaged my shoulders. Similarly, during my medical test when the doctor left, she held my hand. Perhaps I was overthinking due to rejection, loneliness, and a desire for acceptance, but I was captivated by her. When not consumed by my life's turmoil, I found myself thinking of her romantically. While probably unhealthy, any positive emotion was preferable to misery and doubt. Again, I might be misinterpreting her emotional support as something more, given my fractured state. Yet her actions mirrored how past girlfriends, and even my ex-wife, behaved before we officially dated. I mentioned a dark joke in comments about my HIV fears, saying I couldn't even seek revenge without potentially harming someone. Her response was that if I were infected, she likely was too, and given our partners' shared intimacy, it was almost as if we had already been intimate. There were a few moments and a look that I perceived as an invitation, but I changed the subject. I should focus on more critical matters, but this distraction was powerful. A rational part of me knew such a foundation was precarious and could jeopardize our divorces. On the other hand, I felt a genuine physical and mental attraction, which I was 75% sure was mutual. I feared inaction would suggest disinterest, causing her to move on, losing another source of happiness. If anyone had answers, I desperately needed them. Despite this digression, I still felt on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but the divorce progressed favorably. I would remain a father. Max's whereabouts were unknown, but he had been staying with friends out of state. He had called Sherry a few times since she exposed them publicly, but that was it. Update 4. Today was the day we planned to tell our son. Neither of us looked forward to it, but it was inevitable. I spoke with my soon-to-be ex last night, and her tone had changed unexpectedly. Initially, she seemed resigned to the divorce, not fighting me. On the phone, she was in tears, trying to explain away her relationship with her cousin. She now claimed nothing physical occurred between them during our marriage, only explicit texts. I sensed a storm brewing. She asserted she should get my car, arguing she lived an hour away while I worked 20 minutes from our current home. She claimed she needed it if she had our son full-time. This old car had only 2 good years left, so I considered just giving it to her and buying a new one, which I needed anyway. But I also feared that succumbing to her demands now would set a precedent for the rest of my life. I also realized I didn't want to leave my apartment. She announced on social media she was moving in with her parents in about a week. I decided to wait until she was gone, then speak to my landlord. Due to the pandemic, he had struggled to fill units, so he might welcome me staying. I had breakfast with my father. He gently approached the topic, suggesting I hold off on any written commitments to my stepson's life. He wasn't dismissing the boy, whom he loved and spoiled, but advised caution. He reasoned I should observe my soon-to-be ex-wife's behavior to see if it aligned with my desired future. He reminded me I had forgone school to become a family man, and no one would fault me if I decided not to be a father anymore. While they adored my son, they didn't want me to sacrifice myself out of perceived judgment, tying myself to that volatile family forever. They would support me regardless. Perhaps after consulting my therapist in 3 weeks, I would feel differently, but currently I was resolute in remaining a father. Afterward, I drove Sherry to meet Max. I didn't accompany her. Had I, he might have lost some teeth, and I'd face charges. I waited in a drive-thru, listening to music, buying drinks to justify my presence, until she texted for pickup. She emerged visibly distressed. Max blamed my soon-to-be ex for their affair not ending years ago. He claimed the numerous hookups he boasted about were fabrications, part of a twisted fantasy he shared with my ex. Assuming he was truthful, he only had one male partner, his boyfriend, and invented the rest for their perverse stories. It sounded like nonsense, yet strangely, it felt true. Sherry was particularly devastated by his disheveled appearance and his failure to acknowledge his daughter until she forced the subject on her. She was deeply upset. I drove her home and she managed to compose herself for the baby. Not wanting to leave her in that state, I stayed and helped prepare dinner. I showed her my simple garlic bread recipe and made pasta. I discovered she sang a French lullaby to her daughter, which charmed me. However, I also noticed that Sherry had some of my son's hand-me-down baby furniture, a stark reminder of the twisted nature of our intertwined lives. When I left, we shared a prolonged, silent embrace. I received a kiss on the cheek, and that positive feeling lingered through the night. The enormity of my current life was almost incomprehensible. I didn't think it was possible to feel such intense hatred and anger alongside such tenderness. Update 5. I've entered a period of emotional retreat. I'm unsure if it's selfishness or rationality, but I'm questioning my commitment to remaining a father. I want to be a good man, to believe I possess the strength to raise another man's child. I had that resolve before this betrayal, but it has profoundly altered me in a short time. I find it difficult to maintain a positive outlook. I've always been aware of my genetic condition and since my teenage years, made a conscious effort to avoid having biological children. I was responsible, careful, and deliberate, never reckless. My soon-to-be ex, however, was seemingly impulsive, taking no precautions, resulting in a child. At times, it feels like I'll be perpetually tethered to one place due to someone else's recklessness. I had no issue embracing fatherhood. I'm proud of my time in my stepson's life. But let's be honest, my ex will likely exploit my love for him to manipulate me. I'll be unable to relocate or live my life as I wish. She will control me, and I'll dance to her every tune. If he were my biological son, I would fight for sole custody and ruthlessly expose her character. But as he isn't, I lack those legal rights. Perhaps this is a fleeting sentiment, and I'll feel differently tomorrow. But I'm simply expressing raw emotion. Honestly, if full custody were an option, I'd probably take it. This agonizing internal debate replays constantly. I oscillate between wanting to escape and despising myself for the thought. In this ongoing ordeal, Sherry has been my unwavering companion. Against the advice of some and our own logic, we've decided to become a couple. We'll keep our relationship discreet until we're certain it's stable. Being adults living independently, maintaining secrecy shouldn't be overly complicated. Ironically, we're behaving as if we're having an affair ourselves. I discussed the challenges of being a divorced stepdad, and she offered her perspective. She said if she were in my shoes, she would do everything to distance herself from that volatile family, a luxury she doesn't have. She lamented that because of Max, she'd likely be connected to him and my ex-wife for life. Her advice mirrored my own conclusion. Make no further hasty decisions until after my therapist appointment in 2 weeks. I returned to my apartment today, surprised by how much my ex had already moved out. It was somewhat depressing to see it so empty, but also a relief to know she was leaving without a fight. Our son was with his grandparents, so my ex and I met for coffee to discuss dividing our jointly owned possessions. Things were quite civil. For Sherry's sake, I asked if Max had contacted her, as he'd been absent for 3 days and hadn't provided any support for his daughter. Max's parents were helping Sherry, and I would assist where possible. She showed me her phone, 4 missed calls and messages from him, wanting to talk. She tried to persuade him to calm down and face his family, which he'd eventually have to do anyway. It sounded like he intended to flee. My ex then asked about Sherry, having heard from her aunt that I'd been around a lot. I explained we were supporting each other through our shared ordeal, and Sherry was understandably devastated. In the midst of this, she bluntly stated, "Whatever you're doing with her is none of my business, but I'm not foolish." The absurdity of being indirectly accused of an affair by the woman who cheated on me was not lost on me. I wanted to retort, but to avoid jeopardizing the divorce, I redirected the conversation back to dividing our belongings. She took the television and thankfully the unsightly couches. Thank you for the support. Much of my current state involves internal conflict, doubt, and division. But for now, I have a kind companion supporting me, just as I support her. Update 6. Get your reading glasses. This will be extensive. It's been nearly 3 weeks since D-Day and over a month since my life drastically shifted. I never detailed the state of my marriage in previous posts, but it's relevant now. For new readers, the summary is, I accidentally discovered via social media that my soon-to-be ex-wife was having an affair with her cousin Max. I informed Max's wife, Sherry, who then exposed them publicly. Through this ordeal, Sherry and I began casually dating, finding a mutual attraction. I filed for divorce yesterday when my soon-to-be ex-wife and I, aiming for a swift resolution, decided against lawyers and agreed on asset division. No mediation was needed. We tried to go to the courthouse today for her to be served immediately after I filed, hoping to avoid a police officer serving her at home or work. I'm usually composed, and my ex was also unusually calm, almost as eager as me to finalize things. It turned out she couldn't be served that way, so I drove her to her parents' house. I asked how she was coping. Her composure faltered slightly, and through tears, she admitted she was doing fine without me, only feeling bad when our stepson asked for me or seemed sad about my absence. She then confessed she had been unhappy in our marriage even before we wed. She didn't resent or hate me. She simply no longer loved me. Our intimate life wasn't ideal. We were both attractive and sexual individuals, but had diverged long ago, and we both knew it. I preferred to pursue, disliking being pursued. She loved to pursue, disliking being pursued. A breaking point was inevitable. We had several discussions about this. For a while, we swapped roles to satisfy each other, but eventually I sacrificed my desires to engage only in ways she preferred. Some things she wanted I never enjoyed or improved at, and she seemingly scorned the things I excelled at. Meanwhile, she rarely reciprocated my requests. Mid-relationship, we had a female roommate with whom we shared a mutual attraction. Under strict rules, she became a frequent participant in our intimate life. For a time, this patched things up. My ex and I were a good team. We communicated well about finances and parenting, always presenting a united front. We enjoyed the same films and shared artistic inclinations. I, a writer, she, an illustrator. We had countless commonalities that made us best friends, a strong team. But the sexual problems persisted. With the third woman in the relationship, that tension eased, and we functioned perfectly, as those frustrations were met externally. Eventually, the third woman moved out, ending things amicably, primarily because she desired a conventional boyfriend, and few men would accept our arrangement. It was around this time that Max and Sherry moved into Max's parents' second home. For several years, they had lived in her home state until he lost his job. My ex said Max then reestablished contact. They initially met as normal cousins, but one day she vented her frustrations about her intimate life, likely an invitation, and they began an affair. They would meet during family gatherings, using excuses to disappear. I recalled a few instances where I couldn't locate her. We married during this period, so I could only assume it even happened at my own wedding. At this point, I really didn't want to hear more. My ex mentioned she was now seeing a therapist and wanted to treat me like a priest in confession. Everything about their affair was new information to me. I suppose it was good to know the truth, but since it didn't impact my life anymore, there was no real benefit to hearing it. She also revealed that the out-of-state aunt she cried for a week over was actually her crying after Sherry joyfully informed her she was pregnant. This meant I had comforted my wife as she wept over another man's child. I felt even more betrayed than when I first discovered the messages. This confession came a week after I had spent 2 full days alone with my stepson. We had an excellent time. He's 6 and loves Minecraft, so I bought a console version for us to play split screen. He told me he missed me but loved seeing his grandparents daily, who spoiled him. After this wonderful weekend of video games and playing catch, typical father-son activities, I felt very positive about remaining a father. Then she dropped all this new information. I must be honest, the idea of voluntarily being connected to this woman for the rest of my life was something I wasn't sure I could do. As a parent, I should overcome my own issues and remain level-headed for the child's sake. But given the circumstances, giving up seemed increasingly appealing. That thought, more than losing my wife or the betrayal, broke my heart. I was seeing him again Friday night and would see if I could still fight through this. Regarding Sherry, I'll keep it brief. Max stopped contacting her 4 days ago. It turned out he had moved in with his boyfriend. She planned to file for divorce before the week ended and consider her next steps. Her brother was arriving in 2 days to talk with her and stay for the week. With Max's parents' permission, We changed the locks on the house, as rumors suggested Max had been using unknown substances. Better to be safe. I installed a new chain and deadbolt. He was never known to be violent, but he also never vanished for days. And now there were rumors of drug involvement. As for my relationship with Sherry, we were quietly pursuing a romantic connection. We both understood we were processing trauma, and these feelings might not be entirely genuine or lasting. But if I may be a little vain, it was the best intimate experience of my life. I had never been more physically attracted to any previous partner, and I found myself daydreaming about her at work. I don't think I'd ever felt such intense desire for someone before, and she confirmed the feeling was mutual. I'd been back at work this week, and both days she stopped by to bring me dinner she made, which was one of the sweetest gestures anyone had ever shown me. Again, life felt like it was simultaneously crushing me and going perfectly right. Final update. This will be my last update. Two real-life friends approached me about my previous posts, and I'm uncomfortable sharing this with anyone other than online strangers. After this is posted, I'll spend a day or so responding to comments before permanently deactivating this account, as it was always intended as a temporary one. The past week and a half have been profoundly depressing and stressful. I don't know why it took so long to sink in, but the new information my ex provided about her relationship with Max began to consume me. I imagined them sneaking off every time my back was turned. I confronted the reality that she was never truly mine, that I was merely a placeholder, a babysitter providing cover for her depraved relationship. Ultimately, I realized I could not continue living my life as an extension of hers. This meant I would not pursue any relationship with her son after the divorce. It was the most agonizing decision of my life. But I couldn't envision truly healing or living on my own terms if I remained in her shadow. I know many don't want to hear this, and I never thought I'd say it, but he's still young, and I'm still young. There will be many years for healing. Sherry's life had been a living hell for the past 4 days. Her brother arrived earlier in the week, and she was relieved to finally see her family. When she introduced me as Max's affair partner's ex-husband and explained we were supporting each other, he quickly deduced we were dating. He took me aside as any protective brother would, expressing concerns she might be rushing into things. I explained we had discussed this and were taking it slow. I assured him I respected his sister, and our relationship began primarily because she lacked local support, and we related through our shared trauma. I also told him that if they felt it best for me to leave, I wouldn't object. Her recovery and her daughter's well-being came first. Afterward, he and I got along as well as could be expected. Just when things seemed to improve, Sherry received a call from the hospital. Max was in the ICU. No note was left, so the reasons weren't definitive, but he had ingested a dangerous amount of antifreeze. Given the drama and shame of his exposed affair, suicide wasn't far-fetched. Yet, of all methods, who chooses that? I had mentioned rumors of his drug use, so accidental poisoning couldn't be ruled out. Regardless, Sherry felt immense guilt, however unwarranted. Max's parents, who had previously condemned him, now asked Sherry if she would consider reconciling. She told me she said she would consider it, but only to spare them further pain. As of this writing, he'd been in the ICU for 5 days. I didn't know the technical terms, but there were concerns about crystal deposits in his brain and edema. He suffered a heart attack during initial treatment, and honestly, his prognosis was grim. Sherry told me that even if he survived, the brain damage would severely impact him for life. I can't say I pitied him. I wished death or suffering on no one, but this man had a hand in ruining my marriage, depriving a father of a son, destroying his own marriage, and depriving a daughter of a healthy father. I would remain with Sherry until she decided her path forward. If she wanted to try and make things work with me, I was open to it. If she wanted to return south to her family, I fully supported that too. My ex, I heard, was now seeing someone, implying there were multiple hidden partners. A harsh reality check. Apparently, my situational awareness was that of a drunken toddler, or I wore blinders, but I had no idea who I was married to. This contributed to my decision to step away from my stepson's life. I couldn't endure the endless drama and powerlessly watch her poor choices continue to worsen his life. I hoped she would mature, that her therapist would guide her towards responsible thinking, but I had serious doubts she would ever change. If 6 years of marriage didn't civilize her, a therapist likely wouldn't either. I still pondered my own failings. I was a good listener, a provider. I maintained our home and tried my best to make her feel loved. I raised her child, helped her relatives with home renovations, and had a great relationship with her parents. Her father and I even socialized independently. There was no family friction. My family adored and accepted her and her son from day one. There were intimate issues, I suppose, but our marriage wasn't sexless. We could have communicated better about dominance conflicts, but I thought our bond was strong enough to overcome that. It turned out there was no real relationship at all, just a cruel illusion. I wished I had a more positive ending, but this was my final update. For those curious about my future, it involved two main options, both pending Max's situation. I couldn't abandon Sherry during this time, as she had been my unwavering support. Option 1. If Sherry wanted to move back to her home state, I would bid her farewell. No offense to that state, but I saw no future for myself there. If she wanted me to join her, we would discuss it, and I might research the area. She made me happy, feeling like a loving partner should. I wouldn't express the extent of her importance, wanting her to make choices best for her and her daughter, unclouded by my influence. If, during our discussions, she confessed her love and wanted to give us a real chance, I would reciprocate, and we would proceed from there. Morbidly, if Max didn't survive, we were both leaving the state anyway. Option 2. If Sherry and I didn't continue our relationship, the answer was simpler. I had friends and family on the West Coast I missed, and my career offered more advancement opportunities there. I could rediscover myself, build a new life, surfing again, staying fit, finding genuine love, starting a family. The possibilities were endless. I had mentioned this to Sherry, and she expressed interest, never having been out west. It would be a significant undertaking, but with love and willingness, I'd be happy to date for several months before making that move. Option 3, I forgot to list it earlier. I could remain here and advance my career. Nothing prevented me from doing so now. I was a quality control floor supervisor in manufacturing. Most colleagues with my tenure had already moved into corporate desk jobs, which should have been me, but family obligations prevented me from taking a night supervisor position before. I could stay here and flourish, find a new girlfriend, or if Sherry remained, pursue a lasting relationship with her. I was also researching advancements in my genetic condition, hoping there might be a way to have my own children without fear of passing it on. I hadn't looked into it in over a decade. Thank you again for all the support and comments. This was just the beginning of a lifelong journey, and I'd be lying if I said I felt good about it, but life had to continue. 3 months later. Update: my life was almost unrecognizable. Back in early July, I stumbled upon explicit Facebook messages between my soon-to-be ex and her cousin Max. Further investigation revealed their sexual involvement spanned at least 10 years, predating our relationship. The first person I told was Sherry, Max's wife. She exposed them publicly on social media. My ex took our stepson and moved back in with her parents, while I remained in my apartment. During the initial weeks after the discovery, Sherry and I met for emotional support and to exchange evidence for our respective divorce cases. This escalated into a physical relationship, and she was now my girlfriend. Sherry's husband disappeared after being exposed. Though eventually ruled accidental, Max ingested a lethal amount of antifreeze and passed away the day after my last update. Things for Sherry turned ugly almost immediately. Max's parents, who had previously supported her, even allowing her to stay in their second home, withdrew their support after his death, blaming her for exposing him so publicly. Secondly, the week before Max's death, my ex's parents saw Sherry and me on a date, looking affectionate. We wanted to keep our relationship quiet until the divorce was final, but we were exposed, and no one from either side of our families was pleased. In my last update, I mentioned being unable to remain a stepfather, but for a few weeks, I resolved to be a weekend father, despite my reservations. It turned out I loved him too much to walk away. I would have continued seeing him regularly, but my ex ended that when she discovered Sherry and I were a couple. I still saw him. I took him apple picking last weekend, but it was clear she wouldn't allow regular weekly visits. Our divorce hearing was scheduled for mid-November, and aside from occasional calls to check on my stepson, we had no contact. I later learned she had two more affairs, one before and one during our marriage. When our mutual friends heard about the impending divorce, they came forward, mentioning past suspicions about her behavior with these two individuals. I was deeply disappointed they had remained silent for years. It felt disheartening to learn everyone considered me oblivious when I already felt that way. None of that really mattered now. It was like a scraped knee after being shot. It hurt, but comparatively not much. Sherry's former in-laws turned against her, and due to their incessant harassing calls and eviction threats, I offered her to move in with me temporarily. Her original goal was to return to her home state to be with her family, but we were figuring out the best path. I knew some would criticize us, but after living together for a week, we decided against separating and committed to a real relationship. Absolutely no one in our families approved, rightly believing we moved too fast, and perhaps we did. But we were both very happy together. I also learned Sherry never finished high school, having moved to be with Max before graduating. He also desired a traditional family structure, excluding infidelity, so she had little work experience. She was now working towards her GED, so she could pursue employment if she chose. I was more than happy to provide for my child's mother, but after so long without autonomy, she needed the freedom to decide her own life path. Last I heard about my ex was an altercation at a parking meter with a traffic officer, leading to her arrest. A cache of prescription medication was discovered. Initially, I heard she stole it, but it turned out she was illegally acquiring prescriptions. She served 3 weeks in jail, and her parents were now fighting for custody of my stepson. Life became difficult for her very quickly. I could write endlessly about this, but I'll conclude here and answer questions if anyone wants specifics. Thank you all for the support. You online community truly helped me navigate this. Okay, if you're still reading, I think I can share some reactions. One user, Yum, said, "Holy crap, I did not expect that whole story. And he got with his ex-wife, wow." Nanny Sathya 95 commented, "Even though you met her in such a bad circumstance, you guys are trying to build a good family there. Happy to hear the update. I think in your previous post, you said you have some genetic condition and are afraid about that may be transferred to your child. Hope everything is okay regarding that." I replied that my son was happy and healthy. We had tests done during pregnancy, and everything checked out. NULC77 asked, "The two of you entered the relationship so quickly after such a traumatic event or period. Do either of you have trust issues that pop up?" I responded that I didn't think I had trust issues, and she seemed to trust me completely. We were very open about our feelings, me more so than with anyone else. Trust and openness were topics we discussed in therapy. We were both betrayed by the same people and clung to each other, building the kind of trust found in a foxhole. Nomadic as Rex commented, "Have you considered contacting your stepson through his grandparents and offering to help? I think it would be good for him to know that you still love him and didn't choose to leave his life." I replied that I had talked with him the last time I saw him. He was young, but I believed he understood. Trashbin84 shared, "My dad had an affair with his first cousin, and it upsets me to think about it sometimes. I can't imagine what that put my mom through, though, and I can't imagine what that put you through. I'm glad to see that you're doing better, though." I responded that the affair's discovery truly fractured me. If any random man had spent that much time with her, I would have instantly recognized it for what it was and confronted her. Knowing they were cousins, I never suspected anything, assuming rational people wouldn't behave that way. It saddened me to think of all the times I likely smiled and shook that man's hand moments before he was intimate with my wife. Our last comment came from OK Carmen, 1992. "Glad to see things are going well for you. Hopefully things continue with the two of you. If I may ask, and if it's too personal, I understand. It's a good thing she's getting some independence, but does that create any worry on your part?" I replied, "Not really. It's one of the things we discussed in our joint therapy sessions. A big fear I had was that she was simply exchanging one authority figure for another. And I wanted to make it clear that I love her, and I'd like to help be a part of making her life what she wants it to be. She's always wanted to be a mother, and the idea of being a stay-at-home mom wasn't totally out of line with the sort of life she saw herself living. but she never felt like she had a choice in it with how Max was, and she always hated leaving school. Another big reason for her getting the GED was because all this obviously scared her that she'd be a single mom high school dropout and would like to at least not be so helpless should something happen to us in our relationship or if I up and die. 1 year update. A year ago today, I made the most life-altering discovery imaginable, though I didn't realize its full impact at the time. I had just sat down to check social media, saw a message, and after clicking it, realized it was my then-wife's active account. Inside were explicit messages from her cousin Max, which set everything in motion. Within 3 weeks, Max's then-wife, Sherry, and I gathered evidence of their incestuous relationship, tracing back to MySpace. Through our shared trauma, Sherry and I began supporting each other, then dating. A year later, she is the mother of my firstborn child. This affair fundamentally altered countless lives. Max, my ex's cousin and affair partner, ingested a lethal amount of antifreeze. Though highly probable it was suicide, doctors suggested he ingested just enough to self-harm as a cry for help. Sherry had been living on property owned by Max's parents. They initially supported her after the affair became public, but withdrew it after his death, fearing eviction or worse. She and her daughter moved into my apartment. Max's death also led to my ex being openly despised by her family for her role in the affair. They had blamed him, portraying him as a predator, until his death, when the blame shifted to her. She was no longer welcome at family gatherings, speaking only to her parents, who I believed hadn't disowned her solely because of my former stepson. My ex-wife had allowed me to continue seeing my stepson after our separation. My relationship with Sherry became public around Max's death, leading to my ex fighting me over custody. It still baffled me that, even after I caught her in a decade-long affair, she had the audacity to act as though my seeing another woman was a crime worthy of taking away the son I had nurtured since he was months old. Ultimately, I decided to step away from the situation entirely. I felt our constant conflict and my lack of legal authority would make him more unhappy and traumatized than if I simply left. Those who followed my post know that Sherry and I relocated to her home state. I started a new job, and we were renting a house. We were both in individual therapy and also attended couples counseling. We understood that relationships formed under such circumstances could be fragile, and we committed to working on communication and growth to navigate future challenges. We were both survivors of infidelity. Our love story could never be a simple one to tell our children. Through therapy, I learned how much my own parents' difficult marriage had affected me. My father was a good man, a loving parent, and my mother a wonderful woman. But their relationship was messy. My ex-wife and I never truly fought or had major arguments. As a child witnessing a loveless marriage, I associated quiet with goodness and health, equating loud arguments with negativity. My ex-wife, in all likelihood, never loved me. I realized that the absence of conflict didn't equate to happiness. It was just my only frame of reference for a good marriage. Sherry granted me permission to share a little about her experience. She had been made to feel completely dependent on Max for everything. They met online, dated long distance, and he convinced her to move in with him, even if it meant dropping out of school. He also wanted to be the man of the house, forbidding her from working. No work, no school meant virtually no friends outside of Max and my ex's family. Worse, a year into their relationship, he revealed his bisexuality, informing her he would occasionally see other men. Not knowing how to cope, she simply accepted the situation. She was now working on her GED so she could pursue a job if she chose. I was more than happy to provide for my child's mother, but after so long without agency, she needed the freedom to decide her own life. The last I heard about my ex was an altercation at a parking meter, leading to her arrest and the discovery of numerous prescription medications. Initially, I was told she stole them, but it turned out she was illegally acquiring prescriptions from multiple doctors. She served 3 weeks in jail, and her parents were currently fighting for custody of my stepson. Life became very challenging for her very quickly. I could continue writing all day, but I'll end here and respond to any specific questions. Thank you for all the support. You online community truly helped me through this.